I cooked Thanksgiving dinner for my son's family, but they went to real grandma's instead. It was 3:17 p.m. when I lit the candles. The soft flicker cast a warm glow across the table I had set with trembling care. White linen pressed. Days earlier, wine glasses polished with vinegar and memory. My mother's silverware catching slices of November light. A sprig of rosemary tucked beside each folded napkin, just like I used to do when Nathan was small and still believed I made holidays magic. The turkey had been resting on the counter for half an hour, glazed and glistening in its perfect bronze armor. I'd basted it every hour since dawn, whispering to it like it might carry the weight of my love into the meat. Sage, butter, garlic, the familiar trinity of comfort. I had prepared everything he liked, the same stuffing recipe I'd made since he was 8. Sweet potatoes with toasted marshmallows. Apple pie cooling on the windowsill like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting I no longer believed in. I even wore the perfume Nathan used to say reminded him of home. Jasmine and vanilla, soft and a little old-fashioned. I dabbed it on my wrists like armor. But by 4:06, the gravy had gone cold. I checked my phone again. Still no text. No running late, Mom, or even a dismissive change of plans. I clicked open my messages. Nothing new. The last message, from Nathan, was 3 days ago. Callie says thanks for the recipe. No heart emoji. No love you. Just a transaction. The silence was louder than the ticking clock in the kitchen. I walked to the living room window, peeking out like a child waiting for Santa. The street was empty. My heart pressed against my ribs. I went back to the table, stared at the 3 empty place settings across from mine. I had folded the kids' napkins into little birds, an old origami trick I'd taught myself during one of the lonelier winters. The smell of turkey now made my stomach turn. Something told me, deep in the base of my spine, in that cold place. Grief once carved out long ago. This wasn't just lateness. My hands shook as I opened Facebook. It was right there, near the top of my feed. A picture from Callie's page. Nathan, grinning wide with that closed-lip smile he always used when he didn't want to explain himself. Callie beside him, glowing in a cream sweater. The kids in matching flannel. Behind them, a lavish spread. Another turkey. Another table. Another woman standing behind it. Her silver hair curled tight, makeup perfect. The caption, "So thankful for real family today. Gratitude, blessed beyond measure." I didn't blink. I just stared. My body didn't react the way I thought. It would. No heat. No sudden sob. Just cold. A long, icy numbness spreading from my hands up to my jaw. "Real family," I whispered, like a bruise blooming in the mouth. The chair creaked as I sat. I didn't even touch the wine, though I'd opened a bottle hours ago to breathe. Instead, I picked up the carving knife, still warm from the oven. Slowly, methodically, I began to slice the turkey. Not for eating, just for doing something. The skin cracked under the blade like old promises. With each motion, I felt the years peeling back. Birthdays missed, photos unseen, calls unanswered. Tiny ghosts. It wasn't just a dinner. It never was. This meal was my offering, my bridge. And they'd chosen someone else's table. Someone shinier. Someone younger. Someone who fit better in the curated boxes of their new life. I'd been erased, neatly, elegantly, like a coffee ring scrubbed from a countertop. I stood up abruptly, knocking my fork to the floor. The clang echoed too loud in the quiet house. My eyes fell on the family photo on the buffet. Nathan in his graduation cap, my late husband behind him, my arms wrapped around them both like I could keep them tethered to me. I picked it up, running, my thumb across Nathan's face. He was just a boy there, still mine, still reachable. Now he was someone else's. The tears didn't come. Not yet. Instead, I wrapped the photo in a linen napkin and slid it into the drawer. Out of sight. Not discarded, just shelved. For now. The sun dipped behind the trees outside, casting long amber shadows across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood there, in the middle of the room I had once filled with music, with laughter, with every ounce of maternal love I had. A faint breeze nudged the curtains. The smell of jasmine rose faintly from my skin, and for the first time in years, it didn't smell like home. It smelled like goodbye. It's strange, the moments you look back on and realize were beginnings. Not grand cinematic beginnings, but quiet, almost imperceptible ones. The kind that sneak past you like a draft under a door. 8 years ago, I would have told you I was content. Lonely, yes, but content. After Thomas died, the house lost its rhythm. The kitchen stopped smelling like coffee and toast. The television stopped humming in the background. The bed became too wide on one side. But Nathan was my lifeline, my reason to keep going. He called every night, even if just for 5 minutes. He'd stop by on Sundays with takeout and a crooked smile that reminded me of his father when he was pretending not to be tired. I poured everything I had left into him. My energy. My pride. My hope. Maybe that was my mistake. I made him the sun, forgetting that suns burn. He met Callie 2 years after Thomas passed, a bright, polished woman who wore sleek neutrals and never repeated outfits. She spoke in absolutes and smiled with her teeth, not her eyes. I remember their first dinner at my house, how she rearranged the cutlery at the table without asking, how she winced at the gravy, how Nathan laughed louder than usual, as if to buffer the tension. "She's just nervous," he told me later, kissing my cheek. "She wants you to like her." I believed him. I always wanted to believe him. I made space for her, invited her into every corner of my life, offered my mother's heirloom earrings when they announced their engagement, hosted the bridal shower, kept quiet when she insisted on writing her own vows, excluding any mention of family. Not a word about me or Thomas. Still, I clapped. I cried. I said she was beautiful. And maybe she was. Just not to me. The signs were there in retrospect. Little moments. Callie gently correcting my stories at the table. Steering conversations back to her job, her parents, her curated plans. The way she called my house quaint, like it was a compliment and not an expiration date. The first time she called me Marianne, we were in the hospital waiting room. She'd just given birth to Sophie, my first grandchild. I brought flowers, a little handmade quilt I'd stitched during the last trimester. When I walked in, Nathan looked tired but proud. I kissed his forehead and held the quilt out like an offering. Callie took it with a flat smile. "Thanks, Marianne. That's sweet. Marianne. Not Mom. Not even mother-in-law. My name, spat out like a boundary. I laughed it off. But something in my chest folded in on itself. Later, I would learn that Callie's mother was staying with them for 2 months to help with the baby. I was told, kindly but firmly, that it was better that way, less chaos. "We'll call if we need anything," Nathan said. They didn't call, but I made excuses. That was my specialty, excuses and casseroles. I told myself they were overwhelmed, that parenting was hard, that I'd get my turn. I dropped off meals on the porch, mailed little toys, wrote handwritten notes in careful cursive. Sophie's first birthday came and went, celebrated at Callie's parents' house. I saw the photos on Facebook, pink balloons, a unicorn cake. The caption read, So grateful for our perfect village. I wasn't in the village. Over the years, the visits thinned. The texts grew short. The phone calls shifted tone. Polite but distant, like customer service. I stopped being mom in their phone, I think. I became a contact, a point of information, a pit stop for obligatory pleasantries. I remember telling my sister Ruth about it one afternoon over coffee. Her hands smelled of cinnamon and arthritis. Cream, her voice always 1 decibel above necessary. "That girl doesn't want you around," she said bluntly. "Never one to sweeten the truth. She wants you trimmed out of the picture like bad lighting." I waved her off, stirring my tea too hard. "She's just protective. You know how new mothers are." Ruth narrowed her eyes. "No, I know how insecure women are. She sees you as a threat to her control." "She's his wife," I said. "If he's happy, that's what matters." Ruth looked at me for a long moment, then set her mug down slowly. "Even at the cost of disappearing?" I didn't answer her. Couldn't, because somewhere deep down, I had already begun to erase myself. I had convinced myself that my presence was optional, that love, to be pure, must be quiet, convenient, non-invasive. That's how it begins. Not with betrayal, but with compromise. Not with a shove, but a yielding. The second grandchild, Jonah, was born 3 years later. I wasn't invited to the hospital this time. I found out through a group text that went out a day later. "He's here. Everyone's doing great. I..." Sent back a heart emoji. They never replied. Still, I dropped off a blanket. Blue and soft. Left it on the porch like an apology I hadn't yet been asked to make. There were brief moments of joy, of course. Sophie once drew me a picture. Me in a purple dress holding her hand. I kept it taped to the fridge until it faded. The only thing she ever called me was Grandma Purple because of that dress. But even Sophie stopped calling when I stopped being invited. Thanksgiving had always been mine. It was the one holiday I hosted, no matter what. I started prepping in October. I sent emails, bought the special cranberry juice Sophie liked, cooked the stuffing from scratch. I called and asked about their schedule. "Still working it out," Nathan would say. "Callie's mom is doing a lot this year." There it was again. Callie's mom, the real grandma. Still, I hoped. Still, I cooked. Still, I bought the extra folding chairs and printed the place cards and rubbed rosemary into the turkey skin. Like prayer. Love, it turns out, can make you blind. But worse, it can make you complicit in your own erasure. The day Callie stopped calling me Mom was not the day I lost my son. It was just the day I realized he'd been leaving for a long, long time. The turkey sat in the fridge for 3 days. I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. Something about it felt sacred, like if I tossed it, I'd be admitting it never mattered. That I never mattered. I picked at it here and there, a forkful of stuffing, a cold slice of breast meat, dry and flavorless now. The candles on the table had burned down into puddles of wax. The cranberry sauce had congealed into something that looked like regret. On Sunday afternoon, I finally called Nathan. Voicemail. I called again that night, and Monday morning, Monday evening. I left a single message. Calm, even. Too calm. Just wanted to see if you were all right. Hope Thanksgiving was lovely. I made extra in case the kids wanted to come by later in the week. Love you. I didn't hear back. Tuesday came. Cold and gray and merciless. I put on a scarf I hadn't worn since Thomas died. Soft blue wool with frayed tassels at the ends. He used to say it brought out my eyes. I checked my phone. Opened Facebook out of habit. My fingers froze. You must be friends with this person to view their profile. Callie had unfriended me. At first, I thought, it was a glitch, Some accidental click, maybe. But when I typed Nathan's name into the search bar, he didn't appear at all. Blocked. I stared at the phone screen, blank and black and hollow, until I saw my own face in it. Not my whole face, just pieces of it. My eyes, the lines that time, and sorrow had etched around them. My lips, pressed into a line too tight to be called a mouth. What did I do? That was my first thought. Not how dare they, but what did I do? The worst part wasn't the unfriending. It was the silence. That kind of silence, the heavy, targeted kind, feels like being erased in real time. Not all at once, but in slow, careful strokes. Like someone was crossing me out of the narrative, one paragraph at a time. I went upstairs, into the room that used to be our bedroom. Thomas's smell was long gone now, but his presence lingered in the corner where his chair once sat. That creaky armchair where he used to sit and read the same, war novels over and over, nodding off before the last chapter. I opened the bottom drawer of my old cedar chest. It groaned from disuse. Inside was the box. It was just an old shoebox, scuffed brown leather, a lid that barely stayed on. But to me, it was sacred. My heart in paper and ink. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, the box resting on my knees like a prayer book. I pulled out the contents one by one. A birthday card Nathan made in 2nd grade. To the best mom in the world, scrawled in crooked crayon letters, stars and hearts drawn with heavy pressure. A finger-painted turkey with my name misspelled. Marian. A photo of Thomas holding baby Nathan on his shoulder, both of them asleep, on the couch, mouths slack in matching piece. A dried-out flower from our anniversary bouquet, brittle and sepia. A tiny silver locket. Inside, a baby photo of Nathan on one side. On the other, a miniature portrait of me taken the day he was born. My eyes were wide. I looked terrified and alive. I held the locket in my hand and squeezed until it hurt. My thumb pressed into the face of the photo like it could bring it back to life. For a while, I just sat there, breathing, or trying to. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I got in my car and drove. Their house was 23 minutes away, tucked in one of those new subdivisions with perfect sidewalks and mailbox clusters that all looked like each other. I hadn't been there in over a year, not since Sophie's 5th birthday, when I was allowed to stay for cake, but not the main party. I parked across the street, far enough not to be obvious, but close enough to see. The sky was silver and low. Snow flurries drifted like dandelion seeds. The house was glowing. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows. Through the front window, I saw Sophie, now 7, sitting on the rug, brushing a doll's hair. The doll was wearing a purple dress. I leaned in. It was the one I had given her, months ago, for Christmas. I had found it in an antique shop, hand-stitched. It a tiny blanket to match. I had left it on their porch in a box with a ribbon and a note. I was never thanked. Now Callie's mother sat beside Sophie, smiling as the girl placed the doll in her lap. The card I'd taped to the box had said, "From Grandma Marianne with love," but Sophie looked up and said something I couldn't hear, and the woman kissed her head and nodded. Real grandma. That's what she was. That's what I wasn't. The front door creaked open. Nathan stepped out. He was on the phone, wearing a jacket I had bought him the Christmas after Thomas died. It still fit. But the man wearing it looked smaller than I remembered. He saw me. At first, I think he hoped I didn't see him. But I stepped out of the car. Slowly. My scarf wrapped tight. My hands shaking, but not from the cold. "Hey," I said. My voice, caught on the edge of something sharp. He looked startled, then guilty. This isn't a good time," he said. "No hello. No smile. Just those words, like he was ordering coffee. "Nathan," I whispered. I needed to understand." He shifted, wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's complicated. Look, Callie's mom is helping out a lot lately, and things have been tense. You showing up unannounced it makes things harder." "I'm your mother," I said. "I'm Sophie's grandmother." He exhaled. "I know, but maybe some space is what we all need." A knife might have hurt less. I nodded once, like it made sense, like I agreed. Then I turned and walked back to my car. I don't remember the drive home, only that the house was dark when I got there, and cold. I stepped inside, shut the door behind me, and slid down onto the kitchen floor. The turkey still sat in its container on the counter. The cranberry sauce, the half-drunk bottle of sparkling cider, the candles, now hollow. I stayed there, on the tile, for hours. And then I cried. Not the dignified kind, not the tidy, wipe-your-eyes kind. I sobbed the way people do when they lose something they didn't know was still alive inside them. My body shook with it. My scarf still around my neck, my knees curled up like a child. I thought of the name Marianne, spoken like a stranger. I thought of how Nathan couldn't even say, "Mom." How silence had become my son's most fluent language. I thought of the box, of the locket, of the doll in the purple dress. I wept until my throat hurt, until the only sound left was the ticking of the wall clock and the slow, indifferent hum of the refrigerator. And somewhere, between 1 second and the next, something inside me cracked open. I realized I had no place anymore. Not in their house. Not in their family. Unless I made one myself. I left in the dark, not metaphorically, literally. It was just after 4 a.m. when I zipped my worn suitcase closed, took one last look at the photo of Thomas and Nathan on the mantel, and walked out of the house barefoot to load the car. I didn't want my footsteps to echo. I didn't want the house to ask me where I was going. I didn't know exactly where I was headed, only that it needed to be far enough to forget how silence sounds in my kitchen, and close enough that I could still feel the pull of something familiar, some thread of who I used to be. I ended up in a lakeside town 3 hours north, tucked into a hollow between pine trees and still water, where the roads curled like question marks, and every porch had a rocking chair. The sign outside, the motel said Moonlight Cabins, weekly rates available. The N in Moonlight was flickering, like it couldn't decide whether to be part of the story. I rented a single cabin, small, wooden, 1 window. The bed was lumpy, and the faucet made a sound like coughing metal, but it was quiet. Blessedly, bone-deep quiet. No one here knew me as Nathan's mom. I introduced myself simply as Marianne, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I found the cafe bookstore on my second day. The Nook. A name so cozy it felt knitted. It smelled like cinnamon, paper, and stories that remembered how to love you back. Books lined the walls and mismatched shelves, and a chalkboard behind the counter listed drinks like Thoreau's Maple Latte and Chai of the Tiger. I was sipping a peppermint tea when I first met June. She wore deep green overalls and a scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck, like she was protecting her voice. Her hair was a crown of silver curls, and her smile was the kind that made you exhale. "You visiting or hiding?" she asked, setting down her own cup next to mine. No judgment in her voice, just curiosity, like a woman who'd once done both. "Maybe a little of each," I said. She nodded. "Well, if you're staying a while, I could use someone with steady hands and a decent alphabetizing instinct. Pay's not great, but the coffee's real, and the locals tip and gossip." That was how it began. I started working mornings, wiping, tables, shelving books, memorizing the rhythm of peace. There was a clock behind the counter that ticked softly, not loudly enough to demand anything of you. I liked that. I liked things that asked nothing. Some mornings, snow would drift against the window like it had nowhere better to be. I'd watch it swirl, journal open beside me, pen hovering over empty lines. Some days I wrote. Some days I just let the stillness hold me. I'd brought the locket. It stayed in the pocket of my cardigan like a worry stone. I would run my thumb over the latch, but rarely opened it. It was enough to know it was there. A heartbeat I could still touch. I didn't tell June everything at first, just little pieces. That I'd lost someone. That it wasn't death, but something crueler. Abandonment dressed in good intentions. One night, we sat by the fireplace in the back of the store. She poured red wine into mismatched mugs and handed one to me. "To the women we used to be," she said. I don't know what loosened in me, but the story spilled out like a wound that had waited too long for air. I told her about the Thanksgiving dinner, the cold silence, the doll in the window, the door that never opened. She didn't cry for me. She didn't tilt her head with soft pity. She just listened, still and quiet, letting my pain settle into the space between us like snow on pine. When I finished, she said one thing. "You didn't lose them. They walked away. That's different." I looked at her. Really looked, and I believed her. It was a Thursday when the girl came in. She looked about 8, bundled in a pink coat, freckles scattered like seeds across her cheeks. Her mother ordered a cocoa and let her wander the shelves. She stopped near the picture books. I was rearranging a display when I felt a tug on my sleeve. "Excuse me," she said. "Do you have any books with purple dragons?" I knelt to her level. "Let's find out." We searched. Her small fingers trailed the spines like she was reading with her skin. When she found one, she lit up like a match. "Thank you," she said, hugging it to her chest. Then, almost shyly, "You smell like cinnamon." I laughed. "That's probably because I'm always near the muffins," she nodded. "It's a nice smell, like home." Her mother called her then, and she waved at me like we were old friends. I waved back, but my throat tightened. Because for a second, just a breath, she looked like Sophie. Not exactly. Just the shape of her cheeks, the light behind her eyes. But more than that, it was the feeling of being seen, not as a nuisance, not as a placeholder, but as a person. Someone who still had love to give. I turned back to the counter and felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Not from sadness, from remembering I was still alive. I stayed 3 more weeks. I made beds. I baked blueberry scones. I wrote letters I never sent. I allowed myself to not check my phone. Each day that passed, I didn't miss the silence. I resented it, a little less. It no longer defined me. It was just space. And space, I was learning, could be sacred. June lent me a navy sweater the night the pipes froze, and when I returned it, I tucked a note inside the pocket. "Thank you for reminding me I still matter." She never mentioned it. But the next day, there was a bag of shortbread cookies beside my mug, tied with a ribbon. I think that's the closest thing to love you can give a stranger. Spring arrived in a slow hush, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but slips under your skin like warmth returning to old bones. One morning, the lake thawed, and the air smelled faintly of mud and maple bark. The kind of smell that made you want to plant something and believe in growth again. I stayed, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because, for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to go anywhere else. The town had become mine in small ways. A nod from the man who sold firewood, the smile from the woman at the post office who saved me the pretty stamps. I'd carved out a space here, not as a mother, not as a widow, not even as someone defined by absence, but as Marianne. Just Marianne. It was June's idea to start the storytelling circle. "You're full of stories," she'd said one afternoon as we repotted a wilting fern outside the cafe. "Other women need them, whether they know it yet or not." So every Wednesday evening, I stood in the small community library, its walls lined with donated books and old card catalogs that smelled of pencil shavings, and read aloud from my journal. Sometimes I shared passages about Thomas, how he used to hum under his breath when folding laundry. Other nights, I told stories about my son as a little boy, the time he cried because his snowman melted, or how he used to sign his Mother's Day cards, "Love your favorite night." But mostly, I spoke about the space between love and letting go, about the ache of becoming invisible, about grief that doesn't come from funerals, but from being forgotten in plain sight. The women who came were all different. A woman whose daughter hadn't spoken to her in 5 years. A widow rebuilding her garden bed by bed. A newly single mother of twins. They cried, they laughed, they listened. And slowly, they began to tell their stories too. We weren't broken. We were rearranged. One night, after a particularly raw session, June came over with a bottle of elderflower wine and a thick stack of printer paper. "I printed your journal entries," she said, handing them to me like sacred text. "Let's make something real out of all this." I blinked. "A book?" She nodded, smiling. "A book. A real one. Nothing fancy, just your words, your photos, a testimony." We worked on it for weeks. I sorted through old photo boxes, brushing dust from corners of forgotten birthdays and blurry snapshots. I chose the pictures with care, Thomas holding a paintbrush, Nathan asleep on my chest, me laughing in a sundress I barely remembered owning. I paired the images with pieces from my journal. Not all of it was sad. Some entries were full of light. One page simply read, "Today I made soup and it tasted like hope." We titled it, "The Space Between a Mother's Silence." I cried when I held the first printed copy. Not because it was perfect, but because it was proof. That I had lived. That I had loved. That I had mattered. June shared it online. Nothing. Grand. Just a post on her cafe's website and a link to download it for free. Neither of us expected what came next. Within a week, my inbox was full. Messages from women I'd never met. Some wrote paragraphs. Others sent a single sentence. "Thank you for writing what I couldn't say out loud." One woman from Nova Scotia said she printed the book and read it every morning with tea, like scripture. Another from Texas wrote, "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 2 years, but after reading your words, I finally stopped begging for her crumbs. I printed every email, folded them neatly, stored them in a carved wooden box I found in a thrift store. Deep mahogany, the hinges aged but still strong. I had June help me etch a quote into the lid." It was something Thomas once whispered into my hair when I was doubting myself. Truth doesn't need an invitation. It arrives when you're ready. The message that changed everything came late on a Sunday night. I remember because it was raining, and I'd just lit a lavender candle on my windowsill. The light flickered against the glass like a question waiting for an answer. The email subject line read, "Callie." My stomach knotted. It was from a woman named Bree. She introduced herself as Callie's college roommate and, more significantly, her former best friend. The email was long, thoughtful, measured. She had read my book, recognized the patterns, the phrases. She hadn't spoken to Callie in years, but still followed her on social media. When she saw my name attached to the book, something clicked. Then came the attachments, screenshots, messages, proof of what I had suspected, but never allowed myself to believe fully. Callie had spent years slowly isolating Nathan, turning him against old friends, disinviting extended family, whispering doubts into his ears like poison disguised as protection. She had rewritten our history, framing me as clingy, critical, manipulative, telling others I played the victim, that I competed for her husband's attention, that I was unstable after Thomas died. There were even notes from a group chat, conversations with people I once considered family friends, mocking the gifts I sent the kids. My hand-sewn quilts called creepy. A video of Sophie opening my locket with the caption, "Why does she always make everything about her?" I sat there, the candle burning low, reading every word. And I didn't cry. I didn't throw the laptop or pace the room. I didn't scream into a pillow. I just sat, still, quiet, holding the truth in my lap like something sacred and bitter. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like clarity, a final puzzle piece snapping into place. The next morning, I printed everything, every screenshot, every message. I placed it all, gently, deliberately, into the wooden box, alongside the emails from women who'd found pieces of themselves in my story. I tied the lid shut with a piece of twine, not to lock it away, but to keep it safe. It wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror, one I wasn't ready to hold up to Nathan, just yet. But soon. Not for revenge, for reclamation. I started wearing my wedding ring again, not on my finger, but on a chain around my neck. A reminder. Not of Thomas, though I still missed him in the quietest moments, but of the promises I once made to myself before I forgot them. To speak truthfully, to love fully, to never disappear again for someone else's comfort. I bought a new dress, navy blue with tiny embroidered stars along the hem. I wore it the next time I stood in front of my storytelling circle. I opened the session not with a journal entry, but with a declaration. I used to believe that being a good woman meant being silent, that it meant waiting my turn, shrinking myself for the comfort of others. That love required sacrifice, even if it meant erasing who I was. But silence isn't kindness, and love isn't control, and I'm not waiting anymore. A hush fell across the room. One woman clutched her chest. Another closed her eyes like in prayer. I smiled, a quiet, steady smile, because I wasn't waiting at a table someone else forgot to set. I had built my own. I returned the week before Thanksgiving. The drive back was quiet. No music, just the rhythm of tires against cold asphalt and the soft breath of wind weaving through pine. The sky was a slate gray that seemed to match the weight in my chest, but it didn't feel like dread this time. It felt like a turning page. I didn't go straight to Nathan's house. I'd learned that some doors needed to open from the inside. So instead, I wrote a letter. Not a plea, just an invitation. Dear Nathan, I'm back in town for a short while. I'd like to meet. Just the two of us. There are things I believe you deserve to know. Not to hurt you, but to help you see clearly. I won't reach out again. The choice is yours. With care, Mommy slid the envelope under his door and walked away, not looking back. He texted me the next day, Thursday, 10 a.m., the Garden Bean Cafe. The cafe was tucked between a florist and a used record shop. I arrived early and chose a seat by the window. The air smelled like cinnamon and burnt espresso. I wore the navy dress with the embroidered stars again, and my wedding ring rested warm against my collarbone. He arrived late. He looked thinner, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He paused when he saw me, then approached like someone unsure whether he was walking into a trap. Hi, Mom. Hi, Nathan. We didn't hug. He sat across from me, fingers tapping the lid of his takeaway cup like A nervous metronome. I didn't know if you'd come, I said. I almost didn't, he admitted. But I read your book. His eyes dropped, like he couldn't meet the woman inside those pages. Maybe he expected a confrontation. Accusations. But I was done swinging at shadows. I was here to hold a mirror. I reached into my bag and slid a manila folder across the table. These are messages, screenshots, from someone who used to know Callie. I thought you should see them. You don't have to read them now. He opened the folder. His hands trembled, each page turned with the weight of a decade. His lips moved, silently as he read. His brow furrowed, then lifted in disbelief, then collapsed into something like shame. He whispered, I didn't know. I believed him. I know you didn't, I said gently. That's the hardest part. He looked up at me then, eyes wide and glassy. Why didn't you say anything before? I did, I said softly. In the only ways I knew how. In the dinners I kept inviting you to. In the gifts I sent that were never opened. In the space I gave you because I thought it was love to stay small. He said nothing. Just stared at the stack of papers like they were a map of a place he'd lived in but never explored. I'm not here to tear Callie apart, I said, voice calm. This isn't about her. This is about truth. About my name. About who I am. Who I've always been. I reached into my tote and pulled out a copy of The Space Between. The cover worn from touch. I placed it in front of him. For your children. So they'll know the whole story one day. He looked at the book, then at me. Do you hate me? He asked, voice barely above a breath. I shook my head. I did everything I could to love you well, Nathan. What you did, or didn't do, is yours to carry. But I won't carry the silence anymore. He swallowed hard, looked down. I saw a tear fall and stain the edge of the folder. I stood. I won't wait at the door anymore, I said. But I hope, someday, you'll knock. Then I walked away. That night, I sat at June's kitchen table. The wooden box was beside me, its lid closed, my locket resting against my skin like a heartbeat. I opened my laptop and wrote an open letter. Not to Nathan, not even to Callie, to every woman who had ever been erased. I used to believe that if I stayed good, stayed kind, stayed quiet, I would be loved, but silence doesn't keep you safe. It only makes it easier to disappear. I lost my son long before he stopped calling. I lost myself, too, in the pretending, in the polite shrinking, in the years of being tolerated instead of cherished. But I've remembered myself, and I choose to live out loud now. This Thanksgiving, I'm not mourning a place at a table that never saw me. I'm building a new table, with room for honesty, healing, and women who refuse to vanish. If you've ever been forgotten, come sit with me. I posted it to my blog. Then I turned off the light and went to bed with a strange kind of peace. Not closure, but clarity. Thanksgiving morning came wrapped in frost and light. The bookstore was already glowing with soft lamps and the scent of rosemary bread when I arrived. We pushed together mismatched tables and laid down linen cloths. June had found thrifted china with gold edges. There were candles in jam jars and a playlist of old jazz records humming in the background. They came, one by one. Widows, estranged mothers, divorced women, college students without a place to go. A few husbands and teenage sons, too. Quiet, respectful, trying. We shared food, laughter, stories. Someone read a passage from my book aloud and cried halfway through. Another woman toasted, "To the women who fed us even when their hearts were starving." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be okay. I was okay. More than that, I was full. I wore my locket again that day. Not because I missed what I'd lost, but because it reminded me of what I'd given, and would still give freely, without expectation or apology. Love. Even if it wasn't returned. Even if no one said thank you. Even if no one ever called me Grandma. Again. Because being real matters more than being remembered. Because I am still here. And finally, I see myself. The end.